Hi everyone, my name is Emily and today I'll be discussing the animal welfare implications of kangaroo harvesting. I would like to warn you this presentation does contain images of such a nature that some people may find distressing. I will begin by briefly touching on public opinions of kangaroos and how that feeds into why they are culled. I will outline the codes of practice in place and discuss how and if they provide a level of protection for the welfare of kangaroos. I will then bring your attention to the controversial issue of euthanizing joeys, and to conclude, I will bring all my arguments together and forecast what the future might look like for the kangaroos in Australia. Kangaroos are an internationally recognised symbol of Australia and even feature in the country's coats of arms. Like all native fauna, kangaroos are protected in all Australian states and territories, which is why it might come as a surprise to learn these supposedly treasured animals are killed every night in high numbers. The killings were introduced in the 1950s in order to control booming populations, and in 2017, an annual government aerial survey put their combined population at almost 50 million, the highest on record. These numbers have been reported to be at plague proportions. Yet these population estimates have raised concern amongst scientists who say it is biologically implausible and that even with the most idyllic circumstances, populations could expand by a maximum of 15% per year, as joeys grow slowly and have a high mortality rate. In the absence of traditional predators such as dingoes, some are of the opinion that killing kangaroos is crucial to balancing the ecology. Yet killings are so high they have been described as the largest massacre of wild land-based animals in the world, throwing this supposed balance askew. The Australian government has regulations to attempt to monitor the harvesting of kangaroos, both for commercial and non-commercial purposes. Nobody can say for sure how many kangaroos are slaughtered across the country each year because official statistics only cover quotas issued for commercial use, not those killed non-commercially or illegally, although it is thought to run into the millions. The killing of kangaroos for commercial purposes are regulated by the National Code of Practice for the Humane Shooting of Kangaroos and Wallabies for Commercial Purposes 2020, which I will refer to as the Commercial Code for the purposes of the rest of this presentation. Commercial purposes include kangaroos killed for their meat or skin to be sold in Australia or overseas. Kangaroo Industries Association Australia, known as KAIA, consider the annual harvest levels of 15 to 20% of kangaroo populations for commercial purposes ensure the long-term healthy populations of these species. They say that if kangaroo populations were allowed to spiral out of control, many more would die from starvation during times of drought. They also say that the animals have a happier life in the wild than they would if they were farmed. The Commercial Code stipulates that animals are to be killed with a single shot to the head in order to destroy the brain, or to the chest to destroy the heart. This is considered to be the most humane method of euthanasia as it reduces prolonged suffering. It states that all reasonable efforts must be taken to ensure any kangaroo shot at is dead before targeting another. Harvesters must undergo training and pass an approved shooting accuracy test at least every 5 years. According to McLeod and Sharp, the importance of applying a method correctly with the training and attitude of harvesters should not be overlooked in order to cause the least suffering. Commercial harvesters have an incentive to follow the code correctly from the external pressures of buyers not wanting to be affiliated with illegal practices. However, not even the best harvesters can be 100% accurate, meaning many animals take multiple bullets. Even conservative estimates undertaken by Animals Australia suggest that more than tens of thousands of the adult kangaroos commercially processed each year are not killed with a single shot to the head or the heart. Kangaroos are timid and can startle easily, making them a hard target. This leads to many inaccurate shots and injured animals able to escape. Spot checks have shown high numbers of neck shots, and Eurogroup for Animals estimates that up to 40% of killed kangaroos suffer horrific injuries prior to death, rather than the preferred immediate death. According to Think Kangaroo, it is estimated that at least 120,000 kangaroos suffer non-fatal body shots per year. Wounding can prove to cause extreme suffering from a number of means. Particularly with open wounds, in such a humid climate, the kangaroos are susceptible to develop myiasis, septicemia and shock, ultimately leading to a painful death. Despite having to ensure the animal is dead before moving on, in reality there is nothing to stop the licence holders from shooting at kangaroos randomly in order to immobilise them. As such, there is much pain and suffering involved before the animal eventually dies. Once the kangaroo is dead, the harvesters usually cut off the limbs and the head of the animal. This means it is unlikely monitors of the practice can determine the way in which the kangaroo died, subsequently allowing the ill practice to continue and more kangaroos dying in such a way. Where profit isn't being made from the animal carcass, the killings are covered by the National Code of Practice for the Humane Shooting of Kangaroos and Wallabies for Non-Commercial Purposes 2008, which I will refer to as the Non-Commercial Code for the purposes of the rest of this presentation. In some places, such as Canberra, populations have been cleared to make way for housing developments, but the main non-commercial killing of kangaroos is because landowners consider them to be a crop pest and are said to compete with livestock for water and food resources, which are usually artificially installed for livestock support. Yet a 4-year study of kangaroos in Western Australia by the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation found that 95% of crops are never visited by kangaroos, and that few kangaroos wander more than 400 metres from their home in the bush. The study concluded that kangaroos have virtually no impact on the country's crops. Indeed, kangaroos generally avoid artificial water points around which vegetation regeneration is often poor due to the impact of livestock. As for competing with sheep and cattle, studies have shown that kangaroos consistently try to avoid areas used by them, showing preference for untouched native shrubbery found in the bush. The Non-Commercial Code stipulates that to shoot kangaroos for non-commercial purposes, harvesters are required to obtain a permit. These permits generally set restrictions for specific areas and allow up to a certain quota. However, there are no limits on the number of permits granted, which clearly conflicts with set quotas. Upon reading this code, there is strikingly little to no regard for the welfare of kangaroos, particularly in comparison to the Commercial Code. Instead, it emphasises the importance of using specific firearms and ammunition. This is concerning because how are those following the code supposed to take welfare seriously if the code does not even stress the importance of it? Section 3.1 of the code states that there is no competency testing regime for non-commercial kangaroo shooters, nor is there an intention to introduce such a regime. As there is no monitoring of the practice or spot checks to ensure compliance, the welfare of the kangaroos could easily be overlooked. That, paired with the fact that killings take place at night and mostly in remote areas, means these shooters are very rarely put under any public scrutiny, questioning the efficacy of the code at all. The fact there is no monitoring means there is no way of knowing if the permit holders stick to the allocated areas, meaning kangaroo safe zones could be being breached, causing stress to the mob. The Non-Commercial Code sets no requirements of permit holders to have any level of shooting skills, nor does it provide any means of training, allowing almost anyone access to a permit. Amateur or infrequent shooters are less likely to be proficient, to have correct firearms and ammunition, or be trained in how to manage injured kangaroos or dependent joeys. This is shocking. Poor handling of euthanizing can cause tremendous pain and torturous suffering to the animals. It is unknown the extent of cruelty these kangaroos have to endure, as the level of policing and enforcement is extremely poor. What we do know is that there is certainly a high percentage of kangaroos getting shot but managing to escape. Buckshot from illegal or non-commercial culling is frequently found in carcasses being sold for meat and leather. Please see the picture on the slide. Numbers of kangaroos with multiple shots have reached such proportions that labelling their meat contains a warning to consumers to be aware that the meat may contain bullet fragments. Speaking with The Independent, Greg Keatley, a rescuer of kangaroos, explained how he has rescued multiple jaw-shot kangaroos who are unable to eat or drink and are struggling to survive days after being shot. Unfortunately, most injured kangaroos will not get treatment for their wounds, increasing their chance of contracting serious infections, being more accessible to predators, and limiting their access to resources. Due to the lack of monitoring and difficulty in apprehending offenders, those responsible for these extreme acts of cruelty are rarely prosecuted by authorities. Both codes require that any female kangaroo killed is to be checked thoroughly for young. If any young is found, they have to be euthanized, as it is deemed a more humane way to die rather than starvation, for example. Methods of acceptable euthanasia are determined by the level of sentience of the joey. This means that their brain must have developed enough to process sensory nerve impulses into sensations and be in a state where they are aware of these sensations. Marsupials are said to be extremely neurologically immature when in the pouch, and joeys are only able to experience pain once they have fur and their eyes are open. To kill pouched young, both codes state that the person is required to crush the skull and destroy the brain. According to research by McLeod and Sharp, this has led to harvesters swinging the joeys by their feet and smashing their heads against vehicles, or bashing their heads with iron bars or rocks. Inaccurate blows can result in extreme pain and even decapitation, rather than the intended concussive blow to the head. Other methods used include stomping on their heads before throwing them in the dirt without checking they are actually dead. These barbaric practices are in fact all in breach of both the codes and are likely to cause prolonged pain and suffering. Foot joeys are to be euthanized in the same way as adults, with a shot to the head or chest. It is ultimately down to the shooter to establish the stage of development of the joey, which subsequently determines the method of euthanasia used. This requires good knowledge of both kangaroos and the code of practice. It probably doesn't come as a surprise that under the non-commercial code, these rules are not followed as intended. Under the commercial code, it is expected the rules are better adhered to, as the harvesters are usually trained and monitored. However, studies have revealed that 99% of at-foot joeys are abandoned by professional shooters. This, along with joeys who escape after their mother is shot, leaves thousands of orphans to die every year from starvation, hypothermia, and predation. They also suffer severely mentally, as the bond between mother and joey is extremely strong. Development of the joey may also be affected as they don't have their mother to learn about food sources, the social hierarchies, or how to identify predators. One of the pressures on the future of kangaroos include depleted gene pool strength. A 2-year investigation into the commercial industry conducted by the Wildlife Protection Association of Australia and Animal Liberation New South Wales found that 70 to 80% of carcasses were found female, indicating a likely population imbalance and low numbers of larger preferred males available to shoot. This raises concerns because strong adult males are needed to maintain an ongoing healthy gene pool. Many of the carcasses were on the lower threshold of the permitted weight of 13 kilograms, which again suggests populations are physically smaller or weaker. With climate change exacerbating heat waves, bushfires and droughts, it puts even more pressure on the kangaroos to find sustenance in the wild. It means many kangaroos are likely to die from natural disasters, as seen in the 2019 and 2020 bushfires. Therefore, it is likely landowners will see more kangaroos as they will be drawn to the protected, nourished land. But this does not necessarily mean that the populations are high enough to justify extreme culls. As discussed, the non-commercial code is riddled with obvious welfare concerns. Compared with dying slowly from these poorly skilled amateur shooters, commercial harvesting seems much more humane. Yet, due to the nature of these hunts occurring at night and in secluded areas away from scrutiny, in reality, the welfare of the animals is often compromised too, with no repercussions, particularly when it comes to joeys. As highlighted in the acclaimed documentary film Kangaroo: A Love-Hate Story, scientists warn that population estimates are hugely inflated. Bumped up estimates lead to higher quotas and a strengthening of the public opinion that these animals are at plague proportions and are even pests. Together, these negatively impact the way the kangaroos are tracked. The unreliable population estimates, along with the evidence that kangaroos have little to no impact on private land, raises questions for the need of the non-commercial quotas altogether. The treatment of kangaroos and their young is fraught with regulatory and ethical difficulties. It can be hoped that Australia provides a much-needed legislative reform, particularly in regards to the outdated 2008 Non-Commercial Code of Practice. Thank you for watching this presentation. Please see my reference list for further information.